Well, hey there, welcome back. So in this series, I'm asking the question, are we Corinth? And what I'm trying to do is compare, I guess, the modern church to the Corinthian church. We've always got this idea that, the Corinthian church was this particularly evil, particularly immoral church, certainly by comparison to Paul's other churches. And so we really sort of measure ourselves against them. Well, as long as we're not the Corinthians, maybe we're not doing that badly. But I want to challenge that because when you look closely at the Corinthian church, what you realize is that we're actually very similar to them. We don't necessarily do some of the behaviors that they're doing. I mean, we don't boast about people in our church sleeping with their stepmother or these kinds of things. But the attitude behind some of these behaviors we still very, very much find within our modern church and really just within Christianity overall, really within human societies overall, because the attitude that's actually causing them to do the things that they're doing are just pretty standard human behaviors, just manifesting themselves in ways that are being part of that ancient society. The things that they were doing, certainly for their time, were very normal behaviors within that context. But what that looks like for us today might be different relative to our communities, relative to where our society is up to. But the attitude itself hasn't changed, and so that's really what I want to look at, sort of reveal, I guess, to ourselves. Really, when we look closely at the things that we do, what we need to recognize is that really our behavior really hasn't changed at all. And so far what we've looked at is this particular Corinthian who's in an active sexual relationship with his stepmother, and looking at sort of the attitude behind that. And we saw in the last episode where you've got the Corinthians coming to communion and dividing along status lines. And so the wealthier group are going out getting drunk, having a great feast. Meanwhile, the poorer Corinthians are coming to the table with nothing, and they're sitting there hungry, watching these other Christians, these other fellow believers, getting drunk and having this great feast. And so, we've seen some of those attitudes already. But what I want to look at today is it's a major section in the Corinthian letter, which is chapters 8 through to 10. And it covers this issue of some of the Corinthians going up to the to idols' temples. They're going up to one of the many temples in Corinth, and they're participating in those idol festivals. And so again, it's one of those things that we look at, particularly in the West, and we would say, well, that's just not something we would ever do. Well, one, because we don't have really a lot of idols temples around. We walk around through a Western city and you're not surrounded by temples and, manifold gods. We'll find plenty of churches. We might find a few mosques. We might find a few religious institutions, but we're certainly not going to be going up to worship idols. We're not going to be certainly going to these idol feasts to participate in them. And so again, it's one of those ones that we look at and say, well, that's not something that really relates to us. We would never do anything like that. And even if we had those, we know better. We're Christians, right? We go to our church. We don't go to these other temples because, they're full of demons and they're evil, or whatever the response to that might be. It's just not something we're going to do. But again, as we look closely at it, we need to realize there's an attitude that's going on in this Corinthian behavior that is central to their understanding and central to why it is that they're doing this. And so in order to understand why this would be occurring, we need to understand what ancient religion actually was. When we think about religion today in the 21st century, and again, I use the West as my reference point. I mean, that's my world. That's what I understand. If you're listening to this in a different part of the modern world, I'd love to hear from you. I mean, it would be fascinating to hear how this particular passage might relate in your context. But certainly in the West, we live in a world where religion is very much a personal matter. We have this sort of general idea of this separation of church and state, that being that what happens in the public sector, what happens in the political public sphere, should not be infused with religion, because the minute you do that, you have to decide which religion. If you're going to say it's Christianity is going to be the state religion, quote unquote, well, then even which branch of Christianity, Catholicism, Protestantism, it's something that's best left out of the public sphere, out of the political realm, because the minute you do that, you create division, you create a situation where somebody can be persecuted or somebody can be sort of ostracized because they don't subscribe to your particular religion. And so there's a separation, and we take that for granted. We call it secularism, and in many ways, it's a good thing because it allows for freedom of religion. It means that you can be whatever religion you want. But as a result of that, that means that religion is something that is private. You can be whatever religion you want, as long as you don't hurt anybody with it, be whatever you want. That's fine. That's what this freedom is about. That's what secularism is. It means that you can be anything you want and still participate within the public sphere. You can still be part of the society, and that's fine. And so long as you keep your religion to yourself and you don't try to impose that onto the society, we'll get along just fine. And so that's a great thing. It's one of the products of the West, and really it creates a great situation where you do have this freedom to be able to be whatever you want. But what that means is that religion as an idea becomes a private thing. You have your religion, I maybe don't have religion, or I have a different kind of religion. You believe in God, I don't believe in God. And all of that is fine. We can still get along very well, but the important point is that you keep it to yourself. Religion is something you keep to yourself. Whatever your beliefs are, that's fine, but just, again, keep them to yourself. So, again, we think about religion as something that is just something that you have, that maybe I don't have, or I have a different form of it. And I only say that to say that's our default understanding of how religion is, because that's how it's been for the last few hundred years, right? Since sort of the Enlightenment, that's kind of how we think about religion, as that private sort of personal belief. That's not how it's always been. In fact, that's really very new in the context of human civilizations. Prior to that way of doing things, the default understanding was that religion is absolutely central to all of our lives, and it is absolutely central to political and public life. And this was especially true in the ancient world. You know, if you've been to archaeological sites, if you've visited these old cities, what you notice is that there are temples absolutely everywhere. In fact, most of the archaeological remains that you're going to find in one of these old cities are the temples, because the temples were always the best buildings. The temples had the best materials, and they were the ones that were built to sort of dominate over the rest of the city. They were the things that were really built to last forever. And the reason for that is because in the ancient world, religion or the gods are absolutely central to every aspect of your life. And it was more than just because we believe in gods, but because of the role that the gods played in absolutely every aspect of your society. You see, for an ancient person, somebody living, just let's use Paul's particular time, which is true for all times before and after that, but let's just say somebody in the first century, everything in your life, everything that happens to you in your life is attached to a god. Now, this is a pre-science time. When we think about the world today, many people just simply don't believe in gods at all, because we have science that helps us to understand what's going on in the world through natural understanding. We realize, for example, that weather happens because of, the atmosphere, because of the climate, because of the way the seasons work. We understand, we can sort of even predict on a computer what's going to be happening with the weather over the next few weeks. We understand the patterns and the cycles. We understand how rain is created and all of these things. We understand the natural causes that create the weather. But that's only relatively new. We particularly now through computers and through even through AI, we can better understand how the weather works. But when you go back to Paul's time, people didn't know that. They didn't have that scientific understanding. And so the weather was a very powerful force, and so therefore something that must be controlled by a force that we can't understand. Well, that must be a god. And so in all of these ancient societies, the most important gods are going to be the gods of weather. So for example, in the Greek world, you're going to worship Zeus as the highest being. In Rome, it's going to be Jupiter. Well, that's exactly the same god. In the Canaanite regions, that's going to be the god Baal. Think about in the sort of Viking world, you've got Thor. These chief gods, the most famous, most powerful gods in their societies are going to be gods of weather, because in an agrarian society like that they lived in, ones that were entirely dependent on food production, well, that's the most important god, because that god literally controls whether we live or die. If Zeus is angry, he'll send hail to destroy our crops and then starve us to death, or he'll send a drought and we're going to starve to death. Whichever way, if we anger that god, we all die. And so the most powerful gods will typically be associated with weather. But then everything you look at in life, absolutely everything that can change, anything that can impact how you live, that is going to be attached to a god. And I could use 1,000 examples and still not scratch the surface of ancient gods, because there's just gods for absolutely everything, right down to gods for public toilets. I mean, everything in your world is controlled by a god, because all of these things can change. All of these things can move and change and have some sort of impact on how you live. And so when you wake up in the morning in the ancient world, you're confronted by gods everywhere. From the very minute you get out of bed, you go to the pantry. If you've even got food, you open the pantry, there's a god of the pantry. There's a god who's protecting the food that you eat and hopefully providing for you so that you've actually got food to eat. The fireplace that you use to cook is a god. That's Vesta. That's literally a god within your house that's providing warmth and providing protection and something to cook over. When you go out the door every morning, the door frame itself, the god of that door is the god Janus. So think about where we get our word January from. Janus means new beginnings. And so you walk out the door, you're honoring a god. And so every day you wake up and you honor those gods of your household. Even within the house itself, the gods of your family. So the gods of your ancestors are part of your house. They're part of your existence. So you're worshiping the family cult. Literally your ancestors, your grandfathers and all of those that have gone before are still with you. And so they're part of that family cult. So your house itself is full of gods and you have to honor them. Every day it might be a little offering that you make for them, because you need them to protect and provide for your house. And then you walk out the door and you're confronted with gods from the minute you step out and walking up the street. There are gods in little shrines. There are temples for everything. And again, all of it attached to something that's related to your life. There are thousands upon thousands of gods that you can engage with over the course of your life, and all of them play a part just in your very existence. And so right from the smallest things up to the biggest things, like, for example, weather or sickness or childbirth, or whether when you go to war, you worship, there's a god of war. And so we know that certainly in the Roman world, the god of war is the god Mars. It's where we get our word March from. You think about the month of March. Well, March is in the Northern Hemisphere, the beginning of spring. It's in the springtime that you go to war, because that's the fighting season. That's the warmest weather we can go and fight and do what you need to do. Well, you worship a god that's going to provide you victory, and that's going to be the god Mars. And so hence March becomes the month at the beginning of spring. So really the best way to understand how gods work for somebody in Paul's time is to think about what we can now explain by science used to be explained by a god. As a result of the Enlightenment, as a result of our increased scientific understanding, where we can give natural explanations to the things happening around us, that used to be explained by a god. So gods were everywhere, attached to everything. There was gods. And the thing about the gods is that they've always been there. Gods are eternal. They've always been there, always will be. And so as a result of that, we need to be respectful of them. They control this world. They are the ones that control all of our circumstances. And if we don't recognize that and treat them appropriately, what that's going to mean is that God can turn against us. And when they do, they can turn against us with that very thing they control and ultimately turn that thing against us. So that creates then a situation where we need to be very mindful of what the gods want, and we need to treat them with respect. The gods are very fickle, right? The gods can turn against us for any and every reason, and we won't even see it coming. We don't even know necessarily what it is that we've done. We just know that that God has turned against us. So, for example, if there's been a hailstorm that destroys our crops, clearly we've offended Zeus. We just don't know what we've done. Or better yet, we don't want Zeus to do that, so how do we keep him happy? Well, this is where priests come in. You need priests to intercede between yourself and the gods, because the gods, they change their minds all the time. And worse than that, they don't give us books. This is the biggest difference with the Jewish God. The Jewish God gave us a book. He gave us a text and he said, this is who I am and this is what you need to know about me, and I will never change. For the other gods, for ancient gods, they don't do that. They just wake up every morning and whatever mood you find them in, that's what you're going to expect from them. And so because of that, you need to know what's going on in the god's mind so as to not offend them. It's not even about necessarily loving the gods. No one loves the gods because certainly the gods don't love you. They just do their own thing. They carry on the way they always have. They just live in their own paradise, and if they engage with you, it's only because on a whim or because they're in a bad mood, whatever it is, but they certainly don't care about you. So what you need to be aware of is what they want, so as you just don't get in their way. Right? They can become very angry, so we don't want that to happen. How do we stop that from happening? What do we need to do to keep them on our side? Well, that's where we need the priests. And so what the priests will do is that they will intercede and approach the god and say to the god, what do you want? Again, with the Jewish God, they had a book. And that was one of the appealing things about Judaism, was that they had a book. We know what their God wants. He gave us 10 pretty simple rules that to live by, whereas our gods can change their minds on a whim. So what do the gods want? And more importantly, how do we keep them happy? Well, that's where the priests step in. And so you approach the priest and you say, what does the God want? And so you might have a situation in your life where you, for example, if you're a woman, you're pregnant, you want protection through your pregnancy. So what do? Well, you go down to the goddess Artemis. So there's a very famous temple of Artemis in Ephesus, and if you remember from Acts 19, where there's a big riot over the goddess Artemis. So she's a very important goddess, and so she protects mothers during childbirth. That's what her portfolio is. So you approach her and you offer her the appropriate sacrifices for protection during the pregnancy, and particularly through the birth, where women are often in great danger of dying through that process. And so you go to the priest of that particular cult, and they will then they'll take their payment from you. Of course, it's not cheap, this approach in the gods, and they might offer a small sacrifice, or they will look for a sign. What are the birds doing today, or what are the clouds doing, or whatever signs we can find that might be a clue as to what is going on in the mind of the god, because the gods don't speak to us, right? They just give us signs that we have to interpret. And so we might see the birds flying in a particular pattern, and we'll say, oh, Artemis is saying to you, it's all going to be okay. You go, oh, that's great. Okay, I've got my answer. And so you're looking for signs. Now, you as a pleb, you as just a peasant can't figure that out for yourself, because, well, that's you don't have that connection, whereas the priests do. And so a priest will be appointed to a particular god for a full year, and that will be their primary role. But as a city and as a community, there's also a sort of communal societal obligation to keep those gods happy as well. The thing about these gods is that they don't really discriminate. If you offend them, they'll take out the whole family, or they'll take out the whole city, right? They'll collectively punish a group for one person's what we might call sin. And so what you need to do is to prevent that. And the way that you keep the god happy is that you go to an annual festival. So there'll be a major festival for the larger gods, and the priests will sort of run that. They'll be responsible for that, and their main role is to offer a sacrifice to that god so as to keep that god happy for the next 12 months. It's literally like buying an insurance policy. And so that will give you sort of cover for the rest of the year, which means that everybody has to participate in that festival. And again, that's what the priests will do. So the other thing about the gods then is they need a house. They need somewhere to live. We need somewhere to go to be able to approach them. There's this idea that the this God that fills the universe that doesn't have a house, this Jewish idea. That's crazy. Like this, what do you mean the God doesn't have a house? Now, of course, there's the temple in Jerusalem, but this God is so much bigger than that temple. Whereas and particularly later on for the Christians that came along and said, our God doesn't have a house at all. He lives in us. I mean, that idea was just bizarre. Now, of course, a God needs a temple. And this is, again, why we have temples still today to visit these ancient temples, because they were the best. The gods get the best because they're the ones that can kill us, right? We'll live in little shacks. We'll live in houses literally made of just timber and cheap materials, but the gods will get the marble because, well, the gods are the best, right? The gods are the ones that we need to keep happy. And so these gods will get these extraordinary houses to dwell in. And within the house itself will be a statue of the god. Now, the statue isn't the god in permanent occupation of the house, because think about a god like Artemis. There's one god of Artemis, but she can appear anywhere she wants. She can travel all over the world and appear in her different temples. So she's not omnipresent in that way, but she can go anywhere she wants and appear in these temples, and that's what we want from her. So there'll be a statue of her, and when she's at home, when she's occupying the house, then she'll infuse within that within that statue, and that's where we can approach her. So they need a house. That's what the temple functions as. It's the house for the god, and that's the place we can go to approach and to have sort of the physical representation, the statue within the house itself. It gives us a reminder every day that the God is here, the God's watching over us, that the God is sort of there, and that we need to be mindful and respectful of whatever that God might be. And so when you go to an ancient city, what you need to do is to look up. When you look up at the highest place in a city, and whatever temple dominates over the city is the patron god or goddess of that place. So you can see a great example of this in Athens. So even if you've never been there, you've seen the pictures of it. When on the highest point on the Acropolis is the Parthenon. So that's the temple to Athena, and that's the one that's still standing there today. Now, when you go there, it's in the highest place. You look up, and it literally, I mean, the view from that Parthenon, you can see all around Athens. It's the highest place. Now, that Acropolis is it acts sort of militarily as a last standpoint. If the city's under attack, that's where everybody goes because you can protect yourself up there. But it's also where Athena resides. And so when you go to Athens, it's obvious that Athena, this whole city is named after her, for goodness sake, but that she's the patron goddess of the city. She gets the highest and most important position because she's watching over us. She's making sure, and hopefully, she's the one who's protecting us. So the temple is a central place, and temples are going to be everywhere, absolutely everywhere within this world, right down to the smallest shrines. There's always going to be a physical marker for whatever that god is. So needless to say, these are holy, holy places. The whole sanctuary around the temple is holy ground. That land belongs to the god, and everything in it is the god's possession. A great example of this is in Delphi, this enormous sanctuary that sort of takes up the whole side of a mountain, and everything within that belonged to the god, which means that everything within that is protected. Now, that's a really important thing for a city to have a place of safety and a place of security. So what will often happen is that a temple functions largely as a treasury, as a city treasury, particularly the Temple of Artemis in Ephesus. That was a bank. That was the treasury, not just for the city of Ephesus, but actually for Asia Minor. This was the most extraordinarily wealthy institution in the city, which is why they rioted when Paul was threatening it. It wasn't just a threat to the sanctity or the holiness of Athena, of Artemis. It was a threat to the whole economic structure. This was a challenge to the central bank. And so the temple itself functions as a safe place, as a secure place like a treasury, because everything in that is under the god's protection, and you don't want to mess with the gods, right? You don't want to go anywhere near that. And so that becomes a safe place. So everything in the sanctuary belongs to the god, and it also means that it's a place of safety. It's a place of refuge. So if you're a criminal and you're on the run from your victim, or somebody's coming after you, you can go and hide in the temple. And so long as you're on that temple ground, you're safe. You can't be touched. It's kind of like when you're playing tip and you go back to bar or you go back to base, and nobody that you're playing with can touch you because you're protected in that little particular place. Now, the minute you come off base, you can get tipped again, and the game's over. So if you leave the sanctuary, you can be prosecuted again, or whatever the outcome might be. But while you're in that place, you're safe. So the sanctuary functions as the grounds for the God. And so it's a place of purity, it's a place of sanctity, and it's a place where you need to be ritually pure. We think about the purity rituals of the Jewish temple. That was true for all of these temples. You don't go in there dirty. If a woman has just menstruated, for example, she's impure, and so she has to wait until she's past her that particular period, and she can go back in. If you just had sex, you can't just go into the temple. You need to be pure. You need to be clean. If you're bleeding, or if you've got a disease, or whatever the things might be, physical impurities or even ritual impurities, you need to be cleansed before you can go into that sanctuary ground, because you don't want to bring impurities into a place of holiness. And so that's a very important practice. And so again, what we see in sort of all the codes in Leviticus, that's all very standard. That's how all of these ancient cults and all of these ancient temples used to work. So we've got our sanctuary. Within that, we've got our temple, and within the temple, we've got a statue of the god, and all of that is very normal. And that's the kind of the point of recognition then for the for the god. And running the whole show, taking care of all of this cult, is the priest. But again, what's the priest's primary role? Well, that's the sacrifice. And so if you want something from the god, if you want the god's protection or favor or whatever it might be, you've got to offer a sacrifice. You've got to pay for it. You've got to make it worth their while. And so that can be anything from offering a small gift, whatever you might be able to afford, to an entire city bringing out just almost a whole farm of animals to sacrifice, cattle and sheep and goats and whatever it might be, pigs, to this particular god, so as to, again, show how much we respect the god and to offer them the very best. This is why there's not a lot of meat available for people to eat in the ancient world. You don't have a lot of meat, one, because we don't have big cattle ranches like what we might have today, but any good animals belong to the gods, right? That's not for people to eat, that's for the gods to eat. And so we save our best animals for that, and they become the sacrifices. And that's part of this massive ritual that these cities will embark on. And so in any given city, in a place like Corinth, for example, you're going to have all of these festivals happening through the year. This is really kind of what we would consider to be public holidays. You think about within sort of a Western Christian place like Australia, you've got Christmas, you've got Easter, and these obviously celebrate Christian festivals. They celebrate Christian occasions, the birth of Christ or the death and resurrection of Christ. And so we all stop to celebrate that. No. Most people probably don't even believe in it anymore, but they take advantage of the time off. It becomes a public holiday. It's some time away from work. It's all great. You don't have that sort of thing necessarily in the ancient world. Or what you do, you have it for different gods. So you work every day. In the ancient world, you work 7 days a week. There's no weekends to take some time off. Everyone has to work all the time. But during the festivals, everybody stops. That's when the celebrations happen. That's when the free time happens. And you all participate in these festivals. And sometimes these can last for a couple of weeks. So the festival to Athena, for example, the Pan-Athenaean, that is, I think it's about a 2-week festival. Now, it doesn't mean you're there every single day doing something, but it lasts over a long period. And you'll have all sorts of different activities, apart from the main sacrifice, which everybody has to be a part of. You've got games, you've got festivities, you've got all sorts of things. It's just a big party that carries on for a couple of weeks. And all of this is to honor Athena. It's to lift her up and make sure that she's the most glorified within the city. And so we celebrate that. Now, again, the sacrifice itself, everybody has to participate in. And ultimately, as much as you're able to take time off work, you participate in these festivals because they're free, right? I mean, it's not like you got to pay to go to some fair or to some funland thing. It's all put on by the city, and you participate in that. That's what you do, and you're doing it, one, because it's fun, because it's a good time, but also because, well, you need to honor Athena. You need to make sure that we collectively, as a city of Athens, we keep her happy, because if we don't, she can turn against us. And when she does, that's the end. So you have to participate in that. And so it's not just that it's it's fun to do it, but you have a civic obligation to be there. And that's the important thing, because if you're not there, if you're refusing to participate in the festival, and particularly in the sacrifice, that's a problem. Because what that means is that if Athena does turn against us, it's because of you. You're the one who didn't turn up. And so as a result of that, we're all collectively being punished because of your rebellion or your rejection of the goddess. So this actually gives us some insight into the challenge, the primary challenge that we find in the early church. And sort of as Christianity grew and expanded, this was the number one challenge that the Christians were faced with. See, the thing for the Christians is obviously the Christianity emerges from within Judaism. I've talked about that in previous episodes, but Judaism is really what gives birth to Christianity. And so in its very, very earliest days, when Paul comes into a city like Corinth, he goes straight to the synagogue. And so he can create within the Jewish community there a small branch or an offshoot called Christianity. But because it's still amongst the Jews and it's still relatively attached to the synagogue, nobody knows any different. It's like if if somebody was to look at a Mormon church or then look at a Pentecostal church, and if they have no idea about Christianity whatsoever, they've got no idea about Protestantism or anything like that, they look at them both and they say, look, I guess they've got a different name, but it's all the same thing. You all worship Jesus. It's just the same thing. We don't see the difference. We would look at it and say, no, they're fundamentally different. They're radically different. Pentecostalism and Mormonism, entirely different things. But we think about that more sort of in denominational or within sort of different understandings of who Jesus is. But to an outsider, it's all the same, right? It all looks exactly the same. This is how initially Judaism and Christianity would have looked to an outsider, because it's all part of the synagogue. You all talk about this Yahweh. You all read the Torah. You're all Jewish. You're all circumcised. Like, it's all the same thing. We don't see any difference, and so we don't care. So in those days, it was easier for Paul to sort of get around and sort of establish communities, because he could sort of fly under the radar of Judaism. And what that brought with it was this sort of security. It brought with it a bit of protection, because it meant that the Christians didn't have to participate in these festivals. And the reason for that is because the Jewish people had an exemption. Everybody in the city participates in the festival, and if you don't, you're going to get persecuted. You're going to get pressured publicly to be part of that, because if you don't, we suffer alongside because of your stupidity. So everyone is there, but the Jews, they get an exemption because they've never been to these festivals. The Jewish people have been living in these cities for centuries, but going right back to when it was a Persian Empire, then a Greek Empire, then a Roman Empire, they've always been here. They've never gone to these festivals because to them it's anathema, but there's never been a problem. And so the gods seem to give those guys a free pass. They don't need to be at the festivals. They do their own thing down in the synagogue. Everybody's happy. So the Jews have that exemption. And what that means early on is that the Christians could hide under that cover of protection. They themselves, who would probably Jewish anyway, could say, we've never been and we never will go. The problem occurs as the church and the Christian community becomes increasingly Gentile. And this becomes especially a problem later on in the first century. And by the second century, it breaks out into outright persecution. So all the persecution we see later on against the church all relates to their refusal to worship the gods, and especially worshiping the emperor. We'll come back to that in another series. So the Christians, as they're becoming increasingly Gentile, this becomes a new problem. You're a Gentile who's always worshipped the gods. You're in a place like Corinth. You've always been worshipping Apollo, which is the main god of the Corinthian city. You've been doing that every year since birth because you're part of a family, part of the Corinthian society that's always done that. That's always been what you've done because you're expected to. Now you're saying, you've joined this new Christian movement, and now you're saying that the gods are nothing, that the gods are not real, that the gods are demonic, whatever you might be saying about them. Importantly, though, you're refusing to worship them. Now we've got a problem. Not just that you're refusing to worship them, but your whole family is allowing this to happen. this is a huge issue. And so it's not just that you're going to get pressure from your family because they're the ones who look bad. The whole family is going to get pressure from the society because they're the ones that are fostering this. They're the ones who are potentially creating a situation where the God is going to turn against us. So you're going to get persecuted for that. And so the Gentile Christians themselves, they're the ones that are going to be faced with this pressure to continue to participate in the festivals. But for the Christian, they can't, because for them, that's anathema. We can't go to those places anymore because they were worshipping idol gods. We're worshipping false gods. And that's a problem because there is only one God and his name is Jesus Christ. And so what's likely happening then in Corinth is that you've got these Corinthians who've always gone to these festivals who are saying, well, we want to keep going because we don't want that sort of pressure. But maybe even more than that, what they're wanting to do is to remain connected in that world. The thing about going to a festival is that you're participating in the society. You've got your connections there, and particularly if you're more elite, like some of these Corinthians would have been, you've got business connections there. You've got networks there that are important networks that you want to maintain. These are people that are, they're business partners, or they're people that I need to be able to prosper and to function in the society. And so I want to keep going up to them. And it might even just be that I just want to remain part of the society. I don't want the society to think poorly of me. I don't want them to look at me as somebody who's a bit of a pariah, somebody who's a little bit of an outsider. I still want to maintain that Corinthian identity. And so I want to go to the festivals. I want to still participate in these. But in order to do that, you need to introduce some compromise. You need to start to rationalize how it is that you can be a Christian and still participate in these things, even though really you know it's wrong. You know you shouldn't be there. You've got all of the understandings of false idols and all the things that we find in the Old Testament about how detestable these things are. But you still want to be able to do it because there's still benefit to you. Your Corinthian identity, your Corinthian participation is as important, if not more important, than the values that your new Christian community is trying to bring about. And so you sort of making a choice. You're trying to have your cake and eat it too. You're trying to have it both ways. The thing about the Christian community is that it's all or nothing. It's an all-in identity, and at the cost of everything else. This is literally what Jesus means. Take up your cross and follow me. Die to all those other things and focus entirely on myself and on this new community. The Corinthians are going, yeah, but we still kind of want the other thing as well. We'll take up our cross maybe on Sunday morning, but for the rest of the week, we kind of want to be Corinthians. It's kind of part of who we are as well. And so it's just this sort of idea of, well, I don't want to fully leave behind the old me. I just want to have the old me and add a little bit of Christianity on top. And so in order to do this, they're rationalizing, they're coming up with reasons why it's still okay to participate in these festivals. And so they're sort of saying things like, well, we know that an idol is nothing, right? We know that there is no God but one. We know that. We have this knowledge. We know that these are false gods. We know that they're just pieces of stone, right? We know that these are just statues. They're not real. Like, it's literally a piece of rock, or it's literally a piece of timber. It's a nothing. I mean, we could take a hammer to that thing and destroy it. It's just a rock. And we know that there's only one God, and he's the God in heaven. We know that that's real. And so our beliefs, our understandings of the gods, fundamentally, we know the truth about this. We know that whatever is going on in that temple is a nothing thing. It's just a silly festival. And so then what does it matter if we go there, right? What does it matter if we know the truth about the real God and this is just a false God? And it's just, well, at the end of the day, what are we part of? Well, it's just a meal, right? When you sacrifice all of those animals to the gods, you do something with the meat. You eat it. You have a feast, right? It's free food. The God can't eat it all because the God's literally a piece of rock. The God literally can't eat it all. So something's got to be done with that food. We're going to eat that food because it's there. It's free. We're going to do that. And so we all participate. In fact, for most people, this is the one time of year when they can actually eat meat because it's there. It's free. That's very affordable. And if we don't eat it, it's going to go to waste. So we're going to participate in that because it's fun. We like the festivals. They're great. We want to be part of that. And we know that's just a piece of meat, right? That's all it is. It's just steak, right? And it's great. So we want to be part of that. So we know that it's a nothing thing. And so what does it matter if we go? It's just a building with a rock that is and a piece of steak. Where's the harm? That's the argument. Where's the harm when we know the truth? There is only one God, and all of this is just a place. It's just a festival. It's just a party. It's of no concern, really. It doesn't impact me at all because it's not making me want to leave my God to go and worship this one because I know the truth about it. So Paul says, you know what? I agree. It is just a piece of meat. It is just a rock. It is just a festival. It's at its core, at its just purely natural terms, it is a nothing thing. The problem is what it represents. Number one, what is happening is that you have this knowledge, right? I get it. I have the same knowledge. I know exactly what you're saying. The problem with your knowledge is that knowledge can cause problems for other people. When you act purely out of knowledge, that's fine, and you can be acting within what is true, but you can also be a very insensitive jerk. Right? I mean, somebody who has just no emotion, they've got a high IQ, but a very low EQ. They don't have any sense of how the things that they're saying, even though they're true, somebody might say to you, do I look good in this? And you say, no, you look terrible. And you might genuinely look terrible in the thing you're wearing. And it's true to say you look terrible, but it's really upsetting thing to say, right? It's an insensitive thing to say because maybe what that person needs to hear is, no, you look really great in it and you're a beautiful person and they want to be uplifted. And you just go, nah, you look terrible. That's going to tear them down. Even if it's true, it's going to tear them down. So knowledge can be dangerous. Knowledge can be harmful. And so we need to be sensitive about our use of knowledge and our acting in knowledge. Even if it's true, sometimes we just need to be a bit more sensitive about the way that we approach that. And that's especially true in this case here. Paul says, you've got knowledge and we've all got that same knowledge. I completely get it. But what this is doing is that the believers in your community that don't have that knowledge, they don't have that sort of sophisticated understanding of the gods, they still see it as idol worship. Even though for you it's not, and you know it's not, for them, they see it as idol worship. That's the problem. And so they're looking at you going, hey, that person's going to the temple. Maybe that's still okay. And so then they go to the temple, but for them, it's still idol worship. They still see it as something that's evil, something that is sinful. And so Paul says, when you do that, you're actually causing your brother or sister to sin. Now, they're not technically doing anything wrong by going up to the temple because, as you say, it's a nothing thing. They're still doing a nothing thing, but in their mind, they still see it as idol worship. They still see it as something wrong. And when they go up and do it, they're doing it in violation of their conscience, which says that I can't do this because Jesus says that I can't. And so hang on, Jesus said I can't, but I'm going to do it anyway, even though I know it's wrong, because you're telling me that it's okay. And so in doing that, that person has sinned against their conscience. So you're actually causing that person to sin by your knowledge. That's where it's a problem. You technically are doing nothing wrong. Going to that temple technically is doing nothing wrong. But the minute you cause a brother or sister to stumble and sin, now you have done something wrong. That's a real problem that you're doing now. And so this is why I have a problem with you going up there. But even apart from that, here's the bigger issue. You say, oh, it's just a piece of meat. It's just a feast. Sure. And you'll say that, eating the steak is fine. Right? And again, you're right. I mean, you kill a cow, you cut it up, you serve it as meat to everybody who's participating. Everybody has a great time. Nothing has fundamentally changed about the cow. It's not like it literally became demonic meat. It's not like some evil spirit imparted itself into that meat, and by eating that steak, you're now filled with an evil spirit. Like, that doesn't happen. That's not real. It didn't stop being a piece of steak. It is just a piece of steak. And so going in there and sitting with your Corinthian friends and hanging out with them and having that steak, you're right. Technically, it's not a problem. The problem becomes the continually going up there. The problem becomes the continually immersing yourself back into that world, continually immersing yourself back into that society. Sooner or later, you're going to be caught back up in it again. Sooner or later, it's going to engross you again. Sooner or later, it's going to take you back into the way that it was before. You can't just keep putting yourself back in that situation and it not eventually take you over again. Sooner or later, you're going to have to come to a point where you need to make a choice, which is immerse yourself fully back into that society and become part of that world again, or remain part of the Christian world and cut that off. You have to cut ties with that, because what that world represents is more than just this piece of meat, but it's all of the beliefs and it's all of the ideologies that go along with that. It's not just even about worshiping an idol god, but it's about a set of beliefs and a set of ideas around what it means to be human, about what it means to be a husband or what it means to be a wife, or all of the beliefs and all of the values and ideologies that that world represents are centralized within those festivals. And so that is going to inform your world. It's going to inform how you think and how you act and just what you do as a general member of society. That is going to become your framework, your set of values, whereas what it's meant to be is over here in this Christian community. What we represent, the way we see each other, the way we think about each other is an entirely different thing. And so if all of your time and all of your emotional and energy is spent in that world, that is what is going to be informing your ethics and informing your values. Whereas again, that needs to be done over in the Christian community. And most especially because it's happening in the context of a meal. You know, we talked last week, 2 weeks ago, about meals and how important they were. Who you ate with they were your people. You ate with your family. You ate with people who were your, sort of metaphorical brothers and sisters. By sitting at somebody's table, what you're saying to the world is, these are my people. I am one with these people. This is why they got so offended by Jesus eating with tax collectors and sinners. Why? Because you're saying to everybody else, you're a tax collector and a sinner. You must be, because you're sitting at the table of those people. And so what you're saying to the world is that I am with you. I'm part of your world. I am one with you. I share your beliefs. I share your values. When you're actually meant to be saying to that world, no, I actually share a different set of values. I sit at a different table. I sit at the table of Christ and I share the values of the brothers and sisters at that table. And if that's my community, how can I at the same time be part of this community? It's one or the other. And Jesus is very exclusive. He doesn't want you to be part of that world and to be participating and saying you are my people, and then at the same time trying to say, actually, no, I'm part of Christ's people. It doesn't work that way. And so Paul says, yes, at the end of the day, it is just a piece of meat, but it's what that meat and particularly what that table represents. Which world are you walking in? Which set of values? Because even to sit at the table is to say, I share your values. I share your beliefs. Well, you don't anymore, I think. If you became a Christian and you were part of that table, you're signing up to those beliefs and those values. Which is it? It can't be both. You can't be a member of that table in that community as well as this one over here. They're mutually exclusive. You have to choose one. And so Paul's response overall to all of this is to say that if by any of my actions I am causing a brother or sister to stumble, it's on me to never do that again. It is my responsibility to be sensitive to the community that I'm part of, and particularly to the weaker brothers and sisters who just don't see or don't have the same knowledge that I have. I know better. I know that it is just a rock. It's just a statue in a temple that is of no consequence. It's not a real God. And I know that it's just a piece of meat. I have that knowledge as you do as well. But I'm also aware that my knowledge can cause others to sin and to stumble, which is by far the worst outcome. And myself as somebody who has knowledge, somebody who is sort of meant to be a caring representative for these weaker brothers and sisters, I also have the obligation to protect them and to not lead them astray by my actions. And so what that means for me is that I need to make a sacrifice. I need to be the one to take the hit and never be part of that table, to never eat meat again if it comes to that, so as not to cause a brother or sister to stumble, because in doing that, I myself become a sinner. I myself become the very worst thing, the very opposite of what I need to be as somebody who's meant to be caring for these brothers and sisters. And so the solution, Paul says, is that if ever I'm in a position where that might happen, he says my only solution is to say that I will never eat meat again. I like meat, I'll eat meat, it's great, it's fantastic, but I'll never do that again if it means that I'm going to cause somebody to stumble in doing that thing. And so then I come back to the original question of, are we Corinth? Well, you may never have gone to an idol's temple because there probably isn't one around. And if there is, it's not something you're going to participate in because you've got no interest in it. It's of no benefit to you socially to go and be part of that. It might be out of curiosity, but certainly there's no pressure on you to participate in that thing. And so you're not going to be compromised by going to an idol's temple. But what about just being part of your world? How do you engage with your world? How do you engage with the community around you? How do you engage with your work colleagues? If they're going out to a club or socialize in a way that is inappropriate for a Christian to do, are you going to still go out there and go, oh, look, it's just okay. It's just it's just something that everybody's doing, and I just want to be part of that. I want to be seen to be there so that I'm still part of that world. So it's okay. Maybe I'll just close my eyes, or maybe just won't engage fully in what they're doing. Whatever that thing might be, is that something we still do so as to be part of our broader secular culture, because that is just as important, maybe if not more important, than our Christian community, our Christian culture? Do we sort of constantly walk between these two worlds and try to keep both active within us, and sometimes even to the expense of the Christian world and the Christian values and the Christian community that we're part of? Which one is more important? And if push comes to shove, if we had to make a decision, if we had to sacrifice something from one of those worlds, which one will we choose? Because sooner or later, we're going to have to make those choices. Sooner or later, we're going to have to pick one community's values over another one. Which one gets the chop? Which is the one that always takes priority over the other one? And which one is ultimately the one that suffers? It is like that saying, we are in the world, but are we of the world? Are we participants of this world to the extent that we're almost unrecognizable from it? That when we say that we're Christians, people are almost shocked, like, really? There's nothing about you that would indicate to me you're a Christian. You just seem like a normal person like the rest of us. And so I guess if we're honest with ourselves, in some ways, to some degree or another, we really are still Corinthians. We really still are, in various ways, people that would compromise to some degree. Some are better than others. Some maybe don't really compromise at all, but maybe just at the smallest degree, maybe we do. But this is, again, even if it's not something we're necessarily doing badly, it's always the temptation. It's always there. It's always something that is an option to us, and it's always something we have to be aware of. Even if we're doing pretty good with it, being aware that there is this sort of alternative community and this alternative set of values that is constantly trying to draw us back in. Are we recognizing that and using our knowledge to stay away from it, or maybe using our knowledge to compromise ourselves back into it? Well, I can't answer that question for you, but I can certainly say that in so many ways, we really still are like Corinth, because what the Corinthians are being challenged by, or what is driving the Corinthians, is really just a human problem. It's really just a problem of sin and a problem of compromise. That is true for every human in every society. So anyway, I'll leave that with you to ponder, to consider over the next week. We'll be back here again next week, and we'll look at just another situation in Corinth again that might just challenge us. Are we Corinth? Are we really like these Corinthian people? But otherwise, have a great week. I look forward to seeing you next week. All the best. I'll see you then.